Now that House of the Dragon Season 2 has officially kicked off, I think we can all agree that blood and cheese is one of the most horrific events to happen within the story. But did you know that it's slightly different in the books? Let's discuss. And for those of you who are new here, hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Estella Graves, and I make A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, and Game of Thrones content. So jumping right into it, I have seen a lot of people up in arms about the blood and cheese scene. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Was it well done? Was it not well done? So let's take a look at the book and let's discuss some of the similarities and differences, and let's talk about how they chose to adapt it. So one of the first differences I noticed was in regards to Damon and his commissioning of blood and cheese. This is what it says. He had allies at court as well, even on the Green Council, and one other go-between, a special friend he trusted utterly, who knew the wine sinks and rat pits that festered in the shadow of the Red Keep as well as Damon himself once had. So, it's not particularly important for blood and cheese in the moment. I mean, maybe it is, who knows, but that little line about Damon having allies at court as well as on the Green Council, I thought that was very interesting. For me personally, I always interpreted that as, maybe Larys was being kind of a double agent, and it's interesting that that is mentioned here. Obviously, there probably wasn't a good way to work this in the show, but I'm gonna be very curious to see if that comes to play later. Maybe that's why there were no guards around. Maybe Larys had tipped off all the guards. Either way, just an interesting little detail. So the next little difference here is the role of Blood and his character in general. So in the book, he is a butcher in Flea Bottom, and in the show, he is shown to be a gold cloak. But in the book, it said that he specifically had his gold cloak taken away because he lost his gold cloak for beating a to death whilst in a drunken rage. So that kind of gives us more evidence as to why he is called Blood. He's called Blood because he's a butcher, or you could say he's called Blood because he literally has killed people. The other was a rat catcher in the Red Keep. Their true names are lost to history. They are remembered, would that they were not, as Blood and Cheese. So the next difference is in regards to the staffing of the Red Keep. I've seen a lot of people criticize that the Red Keep was super empty. There were no guards anywhere, whereas in the book, there were guards. They were sneaking past guards, and this is what it says specifically. The two men crept up through the walls, bypassing the spearmen posted at the tower doors. Sir Otto's rooms were of no interest to them. Instead, they slipped into his daughter's chambers one floor below. Queen Alicent had taken up residence there after the death of King Viserys, when her son Aegon moved into Maegor's holdfast with his own queen. Once inside, Cheese bound and gagged the Dowager Queen whilst Blood strangled her bedmaid. Then they settled down to wait, for they knew it was the custom of the Queen Helena to bring her children to see their grandmother every evening before bed. Right off the bat, a very different role for Alicent. Obviously in the show, Alicent is preoccupied with Criston Cole, I guess you could say, and in the book she is quite literally there in the action in the moment. She has been assaulted by Blood and Cheese. They have bound and gagged her and they have killed her bedmaid. Very traumatic. And it's just a very interesting change. It's also, much more dramatic and violent than what they did in this show. I'm not saying that what the show did wasn't traumatic and violent. I'm just saying it's very clearly already they are, sneaking past guards and killing people. And, in the show, they seemingly only kill one person, whereas here they are killing multiple people. Continuing on, it says, blind to her danger, the queen appeared as dusk was settling over the castle, accompanied by her 3 children. Jaehaerys and Jaehaer were 6, Maelor 2. As they entered the apartments, Helena was holding his little hand and calling out her mother's name. Blood barred the door and slew the queen's guardsmen, whilst Cheese appeared to snatch up Maelor. I think this is a very interesting change from the book to the show. I feel like it shows that in the book, Blood and Cheese were much more meticulous and calculating and had a much more thorough plan. The fact that they had, snuck past the guards, that they had learned specifically Helena's schedule and when she was going to be there with her kids, it kind of gives us this impression that they had always planned to go after her and her children specifically, versus in the show where they specifically called out Aemond. He was the target, and when they couldn't find him, they kind of improvised and then found Helena, and they were like, what are we gonna do with the queen? And then they realized she had kids, and they were like, a son for a son, I guess any son works. It felt much more coincidental and kind of happenstance, versus in the books, the fact that they were killing guards and specifically didn't want to go after Otto and specifically, went to Alicent's chambers. It felt, just much more calculating. It felt much more planned out and much more like they had almost rehearsed the idea. Neither of these are better or worse than the other, but I do think it is interesting that House of the Dragon does have this tendency to make things accidental or coincidental over very calculating and specific. Once she realized what he meant, Queen Helena pleaded with the men to kill her instead. "A wife's not a son," said Blood. "It has to be a boy." Cheese warned the queen to make a choice soon, before Blood grew bored and her little girl. "Pick," he said, "or we will kill them all." On her knees weeping, Helena named her youngest, Maelor. Perhaps she thought the boy was too young to understand, or perhaps it was because the older boy, Jaehaerys, was King Aegon's firstborn son and heir, next in line to the Iron Throne. "You hear that, little boy?" Cheese whispered to Maelor. "Your mama wants you dead." Then he gave Blood a grin, and the hulking swordsman slew Prince Jaehaerys, striking off the boy's head with a single blow. The queen began to scream. Again, very different from what we got in the show. In the show, it was the choice between Jaehaera and Jaehaerys. Maelor does not exist in the show, as far as we know at this point. Ryan Condal has gone on the record to say that Maelor has not been born yet, so that kind of leaves the door open for them to include that character later on. But it just seemed like, for what they wanted to do with the show, having him there wouldn't work with their timeline. So the choice wasn't between Helena's oldest son and younger son, it was between, her son and her daughter. And so with that, again, a little bit differently, they were sleeping. Like we already said, Alicent was not there. They did not kill her guardsman. They did not kill a maid, so they only killed one person. Overall, the scene in the book just reads, much more dramatically, way more, I don't want to say intense, but it's like clearly really ramped up and over the top and very, hyper dramatized. And you could say that that is because it is written by biased maesters retelling it. And so they're really ramping everything up to be, kind of crazy propaganda, super out of proportion. And so we look at it and we say, how much of this is real? How much is fake? How would they know what they even said in these scenes? Because spoiler alert, not a lot of people, survive from these scenes, etc. This is basically how the scene ends. Strange to say, the Ratcatcher and the Butcher were true to their word. They did not further harm the Queen Helena or her surviving children, but rather fled with the prince's head in hand. A hue and cry went up, but Cheese knew the secret passageways as the guards did not, and the killers made their escape. I don't want to go much further than that because it gets into stuff that we haven't really covered in the show yet, and it gets maybe a little spoilery, but, that is the gist of it. And so in the show, we have Helena then picking and choosing her son, and she kind of, then disassociates and kind of almost counts her losses now, where she scoops up her other child and leaves, and she's much more quiet. And I've seen some people say that they thought this reaction didn't make sense. They also thought it didn't make sense that she offered her necklace instead of offering her life. For me personally, I think both versions work in their own right. I think for a book, for a novel, this very, super dramatic rendition really works. I think for Helena's character in the show that they've set her up as, the more, toned down, shocked version works for her and for that character, especially when you consider in the show they're making her a dreamer. So in that moment, she is realizing her dream is coming to fruition. She said earlier in the episode that she was scared of the rats, so that was kind of a cue in for us viewers to know that she was having that kind of prophetic moment, and of course a lot of us book readers knew exactly what that meant. So for her in that moment to have that shock just like plain on her face and to just disassociate and kind of, retreat back into herself to the point to where she can't even say, my son has been killed, Jaehaerys has been killed, she just says, they killed the boy, I thought worked very well and was very, telling and very informed of the character that they have presented with her thus far. But I've noticed online there's quite a bit of contention regarding this scene. People either love it or they hate it. And I think part of the kind of, contention that we're getting is that as book fans and as show fans, we, get really excited for these scenes and we really build them up in our heads to be one way. And when it's not that way, we get a little disappointed. But like I said, personally, I can kind of separate them as two different canons. And I think the book version works for a literary, rendition of the story, whereas the show version, because it's a visual medium, it being a little more subdued made sense. I mean, it was still horrific. The sounds alone were, you know, very upsetting, and I thought that Fia's reaction and her acting was just super stellar, so I was very happy with it. So those are the major differences between the book version of Blood and Cheese and the show version. Please let me know in the comments below which version you prefer. Do you think the show did a good job adapting the source material? Why or why not? Let me know. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel so I can continue to make A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, and Game of Thrones content in the future.